Now, I did not become aware of climate change until 1991. So in the 70s and 80s when I was doing this, I didn't know anything about climate change.
Alien disclosure and remote viewing into the future. I will be going over a few different videos, so enjoy the deep dive. We've seen the alien whistleblower come out. A lot of Dr. Greers videos are floating around TikTok. I wanted to share data between the mention of tech from Dr. Greers' team and the tech that is mentioned by Stephen Schwartz on a research project from 1978 through 1996, from hundreds of remote viewers' data points to the year 2050. Yeah, it's crazy. We all know what ETs, UAVs, UFOs are. If this is to be believed that these deep black projects are being kept from us, as well as people in the government, is that really a stretch? Is Dr. Greer and these whistleblowers legit? We don't know. We don't have the tech. If we know anything about the intelligence community, is that any info or lack thereof could be a psyop, because that's the name of the game.
30-some years I've been dealing with this. I have dealt with multiple people who have been flat out threatened with execution.
You don't need a formal conspiracy when interests converge. These people went to the same universities and fraternities. They're on the same boards of directors. They're in the same country clubs. They have like interests. They don't need to call a meeting. They know what's good for them, and they're getting it. And there used to be 7 oil companies. There are now 3. It will soon be 2. The things that matter in this country have been reduced in choice. There are 2 political parties. There are a handful of insurance companies. There are about 6 or 7 information things. But if you want a bagel, there are 23 flavors, because you have the illusion. You have the illusion of choice.
Greer mentioned this 0-point energy that we got from ETs, and these black projects have tech from it.
The laws of the universe are universal, and they've been discovered by folks. They get grabbed, they are either put on a black shelf, or they get this national security order slapped on them.
It could change our world, help us reverse the damage, but this is where it gets interesting. What is remote viewing? Remote viewing is a practice of seeking impressions from a distant or unseen object, purposely sensing the mind. Typically, a remote viewer is expected to give information from an object, event, person, or location that is hidden from physical view, separated at some distance. Disclosed information says that it was used by the government during Project Stargate, $20 million research program sponsored by the U.S. government that attempted to determine potential military applications of psychic phenomena. Ingo Swann was the lead remote viewer, and this is from one of his sessions.
The best way to make people not be concerned is to say it doesn't work. You know, it's the same thing as like saying UFOs don't exist and ETs aren't real.
That's right.
And so, you know, you can put out this social conditioning out there. The SRI program was funded for 20 years. If there was no reality here, then that funding would have stopped the second year. I never worked with anybody else but a scientist. I never gave any demonstrations to anybody.
And scientists, of course, are only interested in what can be repeated and proven.
Right. Something in the human system has the ability of knowing what's going to happen in the future. Knowing that our human systems must be able to predict something of what's going to happen to them in the future actually has to be there, because they couldn't survive very well if there wasn't there. So what we call the present, the now, although it seems really big to us, is but a flickering moment between the past and the future.
There are some fascinating stories from the military research that was done by the CIA in remote viewing. And one of the most famous psychics who was hired for this work, his name is Ingo Swann. He recorded some of his experiences. Many of the military projects were classified, some of them have been declassified, more than 10,000 documents. Officially, the US military shut down the project. Unofficially, they transferred it into what they call deep black projects, so that they are not answerable to anybody. And that continues even to this day. Ingo Swann records how a probe from NASA, which was heading for Jupiter, and he said, well, let me go to Jupiter and see. Conscious intention, relaxes his body, projects himself out, but he's able to describe physically. And he finds himself standing on something which is fluid but dense. Feels like hydrogen, but it feels metallic, he says. Then he looks up and he sees almost like a band of crystalline, diamond-like dots sprinkled around in the sky. And so on. He describes, if I recall right, 12 different, very distinct things like this. Later, the probe reaches, I think about a few months later. Subsequently, in the coming decades, 10 out of 12. And among them was the confirmation that the surface of Jupiter has such a high pressure that hydrogen itself is squeezed until it becomes metallic.
There's some merit to this actually being real. And I think we've all sensed family member calling us or something, and then they call, right? There's got to be some form of data that we're transmitting to each other or through events or objects. But when Stephen Schwartz project showed that it was from hundreds of remote viewers could get some strong data from these events, would point all to a strong indicator that it would happen.
Every major consensual trend that the remote viewers from 78 to 96 described have come true. So the first thing I said was, is there a nuclear war? No. Is the world safer? No. The world is much more dangerous. Religious terrorism becomes a dominant activity in the 21st century. I never thought about that. 1978, we weren't worrying about religious terrorists. Oh, there are epidemics. Well, the first one is a blood disease that comes out of Africa to humans and then spreads over the world and kills millions of people. Early 1980, and I go to a friend of mine who is with the NIH, who's a hematologist. Do you know anything about blood disease that crosses over from primates? No, nothing. We don't know anything about that. 1981, the first reports of AIDS come out.
Right.
Well, actually, people don't travel that much. They don't allow airplanes to fly as much because the emissions from the planes do something to the atmosphere. In discussions of climate change, arguments about are we going to have to limit air travel? Well, antibiotics don't seem to work anymore. We are watching that trend happen, the collapse of antibiotic medicine. Social trends, gender equality, marriage equality, a redefinition of gender identity, LGBT.
Yep, we're seeing that.
People have moved away from the coast.
Why?
I said, what do you mean Florida doesn't exist anymore? Oh, well, it's underwater. Now, I did not become aware of climate change until 1991. So in the 70s and 80s when I was doing this, I didn't know anything about climate change. And you buy a kind of box that powers it. And I said, well, what's the box? Well, I don't know. It looks kind of simple. It gets warm but not hot. But you buy a little one to drive a car, you buy a bigger one to power your house, and an even bigger one to do a whole building.
These people talking about similar possible tech and events. Now, what does that say about our future perception of events and choices? That's for another video, but I think this points to more of a positive future than we think, even if it takes hardship to get there.